Let me just undo this for a second. I just want to beg your pardon a little bit because I am not a professional speaker. Among the lights you've been privileged to hear today. I am a teacher, but I am not a professional speaker. But, as was mentioned in my introduction, I do have what I think is a fairly interesting story to tell. I was first a fundamentalist Christian, then a missionary, and now an atheist. And from all of that life experience, I derived some observations that I think might be of benefit to the atheist community. So I hope you agree with me. In the beginning, right? You probably think you know how the rest of that goes, right? Of man's first disobedience, and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our was lost of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Is that what you were expecting? Kind of, but different, right? Anybody know where that's from?
Paradise Lost.
And any literature majors here? Yes, that is a beautiful beginning to Paradise Lost. John Milton, the author of that poem, Paradise Lost, goes on to invoke a heavenly muse, presumably the Holy Spirit, who was present from the beginning, to help not merely in telling, but in justifying God's ways to man. That particular phrase, which is in the beginning introduction, I don't know what happened there. Yeah. That particular phrase stood out to me. I had signed up for a course titled Milton, which I thought would clearly be the most boring course I'd ever taken as a literature major. But my professor, the first day, recited the first 200 lines of that poem in a very theatrical style, and ended up being my most favorite course ever, and I love Milton as a result. But that phrase struck me. I was a very devout believer, and justifying God's ways to man was just not something I had thought of before. I thought, well, why would that be necessary anyway? So I was hooked. And the poem was easy for me to follow for several reasons. I had a solid understanding of the Genesis account, but it wasn't just the Genesis account. Anybody who's familiar with the story knows that he takes a little bit of, he embellishes the story quite a bit. And so it wasn't just the Genesis account, it was ambitious. It was a biblical story, but actually quite different. So I was raised on a steady diet of biblical stories. Those I was familiar with. As a Bible literist, we took pride in not just knowing the Bible, but memorizing large chunks of it. Anybody else here has had the experience of memorizing large sections of the Bible? Raise your hand. Okay, you probably attended the Awana Club program. Anybody else attend the Awana Club program? Okay, that is sort of like the foundation of the Awana Club program. And this was the church that founded it all, the church that I went to, the pastor of which founded Awana in like 1950 or so. He started running the clubs out of the church, and by 1960 or something, he had started expanding. And the cornerstone of Awana was approved workmen are not ashamed. They started a camp. I went to the school, the camp, the Awana clubs. I mean, it was everything, okay? And the way that they got you to memorize Bible verses is, when you went to this thing, you played games and stuff. But most of all, you got this vest, and on this vest you had this crown, and every time you would memorize a section, you got another jewel on your crown. Okay, so it was really motivating, and you would collect like all of them down your vest. So anyway, that was how I was introduced to like large sections of the Bible, not just knowing them, but having had them memorized. I was really impressed when I went to theater later in college how easily I could just put large pieces of script to memory. But, you know, in the end, I owe Awana for that. I do not really remember large sections of scripture now, but if I had to memorize a script in about 10 minutes, I could probably do it. So I can credit Awana for that, at least. But anyway, back to Paradise Lost. The thing that strikes me and about anybody who ever has read it, which seems to be only a couple of you, maybe, I don't know, it's how sympathetic the character of Satan is in Paradise Lost. In fact, he is the most relatable person in the entire poem. Okay. His tragic flaws, envy, pride, ambition, they're immediately stated by Milton. Okay? I mean, so you know that these are his flaws. But like most tragedies, the character is developed in such a way that in spite of his obvious shortcomings, one is made to feel both fear and pity for him. So not only did Milton's defense of God's ways to man fall short of convincing me, I thought of Genesis now as maybe just a story for the first time. I mean, there were added details, there were interesting parts. And more disturbing, I kind of sort of liked Satan. It's like he was a character to me now, a person who was like me that I could relate to. So this was a new way of thinking for me. Most people can recall the instances when their standard perception of the world was challenged. Before my encounter with Paradise Lost, there were several times I considered, my understanding of the world was naive at best, possibly just totally ignorant. I remember another instance. I went to a Christian college, Trinity International University, and the professor there said, we're going to have an activity today. We're going to break up into little groups, and each group is going to put a poster together of what it means to be a Christian. And I remember thinking at that time, like, this is the dumbest activity I've ever had to go through in this college. Like, it's obvious, like, the Bible's there for a reason, just read it. And after about an hour, we broke up into small groups, and we could not agree. I mean, we were a group of 5 people, and so he came back together, and not a single group had completed this project. We just couldn't agree on what it meant to be a Christian on one piece of paper. And I just thought that was bizarre. It really shook my worldview. It just probably says a lot about me. I know that I'm standing in a room full of people that have had similar experiences with cognitive dissonance. In my case, I sympathize with Satan, probably not a good thing for a Christian. In another instance, I thought something that was really obvious and clear turned out to be obscure and complex. In both cases, though, I pushed that inner conflict aside, which a lot of people do. And just like that old commercial, if you remember it, how many licks does it take to get to the center, Tootsie Roll center of the lollipop? I sometimes wonder now, like if somebody had ever studied, and I don't know, the average amount of times one's experience is different from one's expectation, places where cognitive dissonance takes place. How many times does that need to happen before somebody takes notice of it and actually starts to change the way they think, or actually starts to take action? I mean, even more so take action. And this is a personal question for me, very personal. Not because I like to analyze things, because obviously I'm an English major and I do like to analyze things. But my kids are being raised as Christians. So I have left the faith, but my ex-husband is still in the faith, and my kids are being very much raised as Christians and identify strongly as Christians. So I think about this a lot for them. What do I need to provide for them to be critical thinkers? Because I can't just stand here and say, you can't be Christians, or you must be an atheist too. So I've thought a lot about that. But anyway, one thing I can tell you is that living in China forced my largest shift in thinking. I was attending that Christian university, Trinity International University. It's an evangelical Christian college, when in 1998 the first opportunity arose. I was an education major, and a representative from a program called Educational Services International recruited a bunch of teachers to go work in China as tent makers. They use the term tent maker because you can't be a missionary in China. Missionary work was obviously illegal. We were going to do our good work and let our light so shine before men that they would see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. If students inquired about our faith, we were instructed to definitely share it with them, but we weren't to sort of obviously share it with them. However, the reality when I got there was a little different. Many team members were very eager to convert their students. And they had designed prayer sessions and Bible studies and lessons. We had lessons that were designed to get students to ask the bigger questions and force them into a discussion about the afterlife. I was enlisted by the local pastor of the Three Self Church we attended. That is the Three Self Church. And that is the university campus that I was on.
He doesn't have his ears on.
She wanted me to teach the seminary students English. So I had a house meeting in my in my apartment, and but I was warned. Somebody had snitched on me or something, and I said they said if I do it again, I would have to leave. I was careful after that, but I did not stop. I knew it was why I was there. So in spite of anyone said, we were there really to win students to Christ. Teaching was only secondary. The problem with doing something so different, like going to a new country or learning a new language, or just learning something new in general, but the problem in this case was that it increased the incidence of cognitive dissonance that I experienced. The most difficult of these to reconcile for me was that this woman was the pastor of the church. Her name was Gu Baojun, and she was on fire for the Lord. Any Christian would not dispute that. This woman was just like passionate. She had been arrested, and the time I was there, she was arrested twice. But the problem I had with this, the problem in my mind I had with this is I was taught that women could not be pastors. So she was very, very passionate about the Bible, but I just didn't understand how she wasn't reading the Bible the same way I was, and how somebody so devoted to something could have such an error in their theological thinking. Okay, so she made it very difficult for me to reconcile that. After that, the second thing I found really confusing was the way in which the Chinese students flocked to Christianity. They were really eager to become Christians. However, instead of that being like really comforting and exciting for me, it was strange for me because I was always taught there was like this God-shaped hole in their heart, and they were just people were needed Christ, and then when they didn't have Christ, they were desperate and hopeless. Okay, but really, it seemed more to me like the Chinese students just thought English was fun and cool and different. It was a good way to improve their English, so they wanted to go to church with us. I'm not saying there weren't some really sincere, genuine Christians. There really were some sincere, genuine Christians. But most of the students who were really interested in Christianity were mostly interested in it because it was different and curious, or they were curious about it. In fact, I remember thinking at the time, because my students in the U.S., my high school students that I was teaching, I was like, I wish I could get my high school students in the U.S. to think English was so cool. Even the students in China were like, yes, I want to go to church because church is cool, it's in English. But, and so it seemed that joining was more fueled by curiosity than it was fueled by necessity, like they needed God. It seemed more curiosity to me. And then there was the general experience I had similar to Daniel Everett had in his book he wrote, or in his experience as a missionary. He wrote about it in a book called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. I don't know if you've ever read it. I read it after I deconverted. It's just a really lovely piece of work. He was like in the jungle. I mean, he was like that kind of missionary. But he said that, or for me, in a similar way, I didn't seem like Chinese culture or Chinese people were entirely bankrupt. And they were filled with people who needed God to be happy. They seemed to me just like any group. They seemed happy, content types, sad, disgruntled ones. Though they were in an atheist country and mostly without the teachings of Jesus or instructions on how to live the life, they were supposed to live in the Bible, that the Bible teaches you, they honestly did not seem significantly different to me than any other group of students I taught before. So that was another thing that was perplexing to me. I was expecting a God-shaped hole. And I would just fill it up, and that didn't happen. Can I have somebody get me a glass of water? So I came back to the U.S. for a time to finish my MS in education, and I was thinking a little bit more critically about my faith, which was good. I became interested in the history of Christianity. I thought that perhaps time, culture, and language, thank you so much. I thought maybe time, culture, and language had obscured the meaning of the New Testament. Americans were content to accept a culturally defined understanding of Christianity, but I wanted the truth. I wanted the truth of the faith of the early church. So a year or so later, after a lot of reflection and study, I joined the Orthodox Church. So I've pretty much covered all my bases. I've been Christian, I've been Orthodox. I was baptized Catholic when I was born. So I'm pretty much covered. But as you can see, I consider this some progress. And actually, mentally, it was progress, but you can tell by the garb I went pretty wildly conservative with my head covering and my long clothes. So going back to China was complicated because there really wasn't an Orthodox church there. There was like the small house church run by a Russian priest. Father Dionysi and Nadia, and I got really involved with that church and group. But I became distant from the evangelical community now because they just thought it was really weird and possibly heretical to be Orthodox, but they didn't really spend a lot of time looking into what it meant to be Orthodox. They just kind of ostracized me. So luckily, when I became an atheist, I had some familiarity with the feeling of being ostracized already or becoming Orthodox. So, okay, I had that going for me. Anyway, still, the wheels had already started turning, and they kept turning. And as much as I love being Orthodox, and it's honestly like hearing that beautiful choir, that was something that drew me into it. I mean, the music is beautiful, the liturgy is beautiful, the place is beautiful. And I don't have any hard feelings about that church, honestly. I probably will end up going to liturgies eventually because I just love being there. You stand there and reflect a lot. You just stand and you're thinking, and it's very meditative, whatever that means. But you quiet and you're just thinking, and there's music in the background. It's very enjoyable for people who like to think. So I actually really loved it, but of course I'm thinking a lot. And eventually, I remember confessing to the priest when I come home for Christmas in 2010. I just said, I just don't believe in this anymore. And I remember what he said to me. He said, don't worry, doubt is a part of faith. Keep at it and your belief will return, he said to me. But it never did. The next year I got a new job teaching at an international school. I spent about an hour on the bus going there and an hour and a half on the bus coming back. And I started watching YouTube videos to pass the time. In China you can't get YouTube, but you can, on a VPN, download them. And I would just download them, and I was downloading episodes of the Atheist Experience and some Zeteticon, some film videos of Zeteticon I download debates. There was a podcast they had that would just be two sides of a debate. It's called Intelligence Squared Podcast from NPR. So I would just load up my iPad full of these, material, and it was all about the bigger questions. Is there a God? What does it mean what does morality outside of religion mean? Stuff like that. And I would just watch them back and forth. And somewhere in the midst of that time, I can't identify a time, but somewhere in the midst of time, I just became a complete non-believer. So it might be helpful to imagine this. Buses in China are not like buses here in the United States. There was a time, I recall, when I was watching an episode of the Atheist Experience, and I was sitting on a jam-packed, smoke-filled seat while being pecked at by a caged chicken, a real live caged chicken, who was, I assume, soon to be the seat keeper's evening meal. And it was Matt Dillahunty on that episode. And I wondered at the time whether Matt Dillahunty had ever imagined a scenario in which his show would be viewed in such a bizarre context. So, for those of you who watch, you can catalog where your episodes are being streamed from and downloaded from. If there was an uptake in all of the downloads in China, you can credit me for that. So, but during that time, I just completely identified as a non-believer from just watching, a bunch of YouTube videos. "'Twas brillig." I have kids, so bear with me. "'Twas brillig, and the stithy toads did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borough groves, and moan rasts self grave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son." Who knows that poem? Who knows that poem? That's right. One of my favorite children's poems, Jabberwocky. Upon reading it, Alice responds with, "It seems very pretty," she said when she finished it, "but it is rather hard to understand." You see, she didn't like to confess, even to herself, that she couldn't make sense of it at all. Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't know exactly what they are. I love that book, and I love this poem in particular, not just because nonsense is fun, because nonsense is fun. More than for comedic purposes alone, Carol twisted common words to aid in visual representation of how readily we organize chaos and confusion into stories and situations our brain has never seen before. Alice approached this strange new world with her own paradigm, her own set of preconceived notions and expectations, Her obstinate refusal to see the world as entirely different from her own is no different from how your brain draws meaning from that nonsense poem. Like Matt said earlier, words in themselves don't have meaning intrinsically. We apply meaning to them. As you did, as I was reading that, you were applying meaning to that, even though it is really basically nonsense. Nonsense makes sense because our brains make sense of it. Any magician will tell you that the easiest audience to fool is an audience that consists of knowledgeable adults. The older and wiser that we actually become, the more fixed we become in our own perception of the world. Just like anything becomes habit with repetition, so too do our assumptions and experiences become cemented to us as the only form of reality the longer that they go unchallenged. I also really enjoy David Foster Wallace's piece, This is Water. I won't read it, but and another book I really enjoyed was Thinking Fast and Slow, because in both cases it highlights, like in Thinking Fast and Slow, I don't know if any of you have read it, it highlights the way our lazy brains perpetuate this problem. Our tendency towards biases is in many cases the way the brain making shortcuts in judgment by making assumptions based on our previous experiences, and also previous limited. So the older we become, the more expert we think ourselves, the faster we jump to these unwarranted conclusions. And of course, that's a lot of the ways in which religion is perpetuated. Right? You're all being told, and then you think you know, and then you continually think you know. And sometimes I think it's like the economic principle of sunken costs. You've already sunk your entire life into this. You're going to keep going. Everything you have is involved in it. But I do remember there was this one other thing that really, it was when I was maybe 10 years ago or so, I might be wrong about the time, I saw this episode of, it was like 20 or 60 Minutes, and they had done an experiment where they had given like 60 people, they told them they were going to give them strawberry yogurt, different kinds of strawberry yogurt, and they wanted them to analyze how strawberry the flavor was. And in the episode it was kind of comedic because they show you in the background, they're like putting chocolate syrup in the strawberry yogurt. Chocolate syrup in the vanilla yogurt that they had, and they're showing you, and they're feeding it to them, and they're like, this is the most strawberry flavor I've ever had in my whole life. And it was, and at the end they told me, we didn't even give you strawberry yogurt, we gave you chocolate yogurt, and they just couldn't believe it. We're so sure that our own perception, our own senses are correct, that we are very surprised when we're fooled. I always love the saying, so nothing fools you better than the lie you tell yourself, and in many cases the lie you tell yourself is that my perception is reliable. So how do we become less easy to fool? This is a really important question for me because, again, I'm trying to teach my kids, and I don't want them, most of all, I want them to be critical thinkers. But I think it's interesting, this is a manual from the Missionary manual that they gave us when we were going over to China, and I'm going to read a little portion of it here. Through its vast history, China has produced many great thinkers, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Liang Qichao. However, since the communist takeover China, Marxist doctrine has impacted every facet of society. This pervasive indoctrination process attempted to eradicate any objective understanding of other philosophies and ideas, which ultimately weakened the analytical ability of many Chinese people. This analytical weakness is common among Chinese students, particularly those of the middle and younger generations who are raised and educated under China's communist system. Although many Chinese students may not think of themselves as communists, in reality their thinking pattern and worldview is identical to communism. They will tend to accept certain Marxist doctrines as the only proper way to view the world, such as human beings create and decide human history. Science leads people to truth. That's an awful one. Who would ever want to think that? Religion, especially Christianity, is opium to the people. While many Chinese students will accept these teachings as fact, most know little or nothing about its source, Marxism. Very few have even read anything by Karl Marx, like most Christians have either. What these students know and believe is that the Chinese government has what the Chinese government has promoted through education and propaganda. Thus, when Chinese students hear about Christianity, their presupposition is that all religions are in essence untrue. Okay, so I was going back through my material that they were used to train us, and I found this passage particularly striking. Because as a missionary, I believe that students were imprisoned to this Marxist ideology without realizing the entire passage could be rewritten to reflect the in-the-box type of thinking that most Christians have about their own faith and their continued misperception about those who differ in their beliefs. And my Chinese students, many of them, if there's anything I want to communicate to you today, it's that many of my students readily accept this shift. They readily accepted this shift in allegiance from one ideology to another ideology without ever really analyzing the ideas or questioning the claims. They were right about that in this passage. They weren't very good at analyzing anything. And they were taught to just accept whatever it was that was told to them was true. It was a problem in China, okay? However, all I was offering them was just a different set of ideas that I was telling them was true, okay? The Christian one maybe seemed hipper or more interesting or more beneficial to them because they might learn English, and some of my students did convert, okay? I'm a classroom teacher. English is obviously my subject, as you can tell. But the last year I've been involved in technology integration work, utilizing iPads in the classroom. And substituting one finally accepted ideology for another is kind of like when I train teachers to integrate iPads in the classroom, and they say, come back to the class, I've done a really cool project, I want you to see it. And I go back and they're like, look, we're making newsletters on the iPad. You know, and it's like, I clearly not communicate to you that substituting one thing for another thing is not what I'm trying to reach at when we're doing technology integration. That's just substitution. Okay, that's not transformation, that's just substitution. And in China, really, that's what my missionary work was, and that is what missionary work in a religious sense is. You're going to areas where people have a fixed, authoritarian view. With whether in China they're atheists, and it was that, but their particular way of thinking was authoritarian. Somebody told me to believe it, I trust them and I believe it. So I was just offering just a different ideology to buy into. Okay. So in the end, I mean, even in technology integration as in worldview, substitution is easy. Thinking differently is not only difficult, but it's uncomfortable, and that's why it's so hard. That's why my Chinese students were willing to become Christians so easily. It really wasn't that different of a way of thinking. Okay? Follow this God, follow this Bible. This is the truth. Okay? It was an easy pill to swallow because it was just a different color. Okay? Same content, just a different color. The ease with which we can acquire information in any place and context, it's startling. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I was on a bus in China with a chicken pecking at me, and I was watching the atheist experience. I mean, and I wasn't even allowed to be watching that show, but I got around it by VPN. So, I mean, it's amazing. Even in China, you can get lots of information. But why did it take me so long to even reach the information that was just so readily available to me? Okay? Why did it take me so long to face the inconsistencies in my faith? In part, the thought process to undo years of indoctrination is a long one. But it is painful. It's really uncomfortable, too. I've lost a lot. I mean, my life is just in shambles in some ways. So I don't want my kids to go through that, but I'm limited in my influence over them. But what I can do is I try to give them some tools of critical and skeptical thinking that I think have influenced me significantly that I found along the way. So here's the things that I try to do with my kids. Because in the end, and I always tell people, I don't have an end goal for my kid. That's like the substitution model. I'm not saying my kids must be atheists. My kids must be non-believers or whatever. I feel most importantly, the only thing that I really want them to be are critical thinkers, skeptical, critical thinkers. That's what I care about. So my kids are little, they're 9, 6, and 4. So these are some of the things I've come up with to just try to foster that in them. Allow and encourage lots of thinking in general. Learn about the brain. I mean, more like the psychology studies that I've been reading. I mean, that's what fascinates me, how our brain is constantly tricking us. Not always a reliable resource. So I have a resource to teach them about the brain, its parts, what each part does, how it works, how it fails us, how little we still know about the brain. I want them to experience new experiences and adventures. Like I said earlier, going to China seemed to have the most impact on me because I think being outside of your comfort zone, being in such a radically different environment, doing something that requires your brain to work harder because you don't have those networks that have already been formed, those shortcuts that can fill in the gaps. So you put yourself in a new environment and your brain has to work harder because it doesn't have all the information. And so it has to work harder to understand everything. And I think in those contexts, you're more capable of thinking differently than you ever were before. So that's why I think that the China experience encouraged me, or led me further along the way of realizing all of the things that were completely untrue about what I believed. So I encourage them to have new experiences, to be, go different places. They do speak Mandarin still, so I think speaking a second language helps. We do experiments together. And the last one is one important for me as a parent. I want to show my kids that I'm willing to listen and change my mind. That there's new information, not fixed in one state. I don't want them to be fixed in one state. I want them to be people who are willing to grow and learn. So I love this book, Philosophy for Kids. It has a teaching point and a bunch of questions that they go through, and we do it at night, at the dinner table. Mind Up is a curriculum. Some of it's a little bit hokey pokey, but it does have sections on about the brain and what parts of the brain do and how the brain misleads us sometimes. And then this one you can't see. It's a little chart I have for the kids, encouraging them to do something new or different or challenge themselves in each way. Instead of just behavioral things, I've just given them, like my son hates trying any new kinds of food. Like really hates it. Like it's so hard to get him to eat anything. So that for him, that's listed more specifically. Like if you try something that's green or slimy or something like that. But no, I think that's it. Yeah, he is slimy for some reason. I think a lot of people don't like slimy things. But anyway, so I encourage them if they do that. It's a fake dollar, but I tell them I'll give them a real dollar later. They never seem to ask. They just want the fake dollar. See how easy? Weird. So those are just some of the things in my home that I do. And I try to model doing new things because I think that's important too. Like the last year I got really into CrossFit. It's interesting, when I became a non-believer, for some reason I got really fixated on learning juggling. And I don't know, maybe because a better reason for that, I don't know. But I was just like, I have to learn to juggle. And I did. And for some reason I knew that my life was going to be incredibly hard and I would have to get really good at learning new things. So I decided juggling was going to be my thing I fixated on. So anyway, I tried CrossFit, I tried to do challenges. I'm trying to think of other, speaking today, I guess that's a new thing. I'm not a professional speaker. So, I think that's one way. I do experiments. I don't know if it's going to play, but that one with the yoga, I thought, well, I should try it with my daughter. And I actually do all the time, though. We do experiments. Let's try it out. Let's see how you respond in this environment or that environment. I don't know if this will play. You ready? Is that a strong strawberry flavor?
No, it tastes more like chocolate.
I guess she's not trickable yet. So, but I did tell her about that study, and I explained it to her, and we tried it together. So, this is from East of Eden. I don't know if anybody's ever read it, but it is one of my favorite quotes. That's what I'm talking to you. You are one of the rare people who can separate your observation from your preconception. You see what is where most people see what they expect. Maybe that is easier for us skeptics to do, but maybe not. Maybe we think we're really good at thinking, so sometimes that is an issue we have. Are we really being critical about what we think? So I try to do this. There's no rest days, here. You have to do it every day. You have to challenge yourself. So I try to read this every day. I read this to myself every day. Our minds are imperfect and full of bias. I make better decisions when I constantly ask myself, am I clouding the situation, person, article, website, through the lens of my own expectations? The mind, is like a muscle. It's prone to laziness, and the more you use it and get used to thinking critically, the easier it becomes. I think this one is maybe a little bit harder. I think, and it is fostering an attitude of others that is not based on impermanence. Foster an attitude of ourselves and others that is based in impermanence. There's been a lot of research, I'm an educator, about fixed versus growth types of thinking. Has anybody heard of those terms? Okay, yeah, and education is kind of a big thing. Tends to be kind of, education tends to be trendy, but a fixed mindset assumes that our character, intelligence, and creative ability are static, okay, and that we can't change them in any meaningful way, okay? And it's listed here, but basically it's just sort of idea that, you know, you're given a certain set of skills in life, you're good at this, I'm not, you're good at that, I'm not. The growth mindset, and it refers to intelligence, because a lot of people do have a tendency to think some people are smart, some people are not. Growth mindset thrives on challenge. It sees failure as not an evidence of unintelligence, but as a heartening springboard for growth and stretching our existing abilities. And I think this mentality can be applied towards those who are different from us. There have been some psychological studies that have highlighted this as a way to counteract tribalism. In our species, studies done on babies show that very early on, babies prefer people of their own race. And there's just a natural tendency towards in-out categorizations. Later, this extends to appearance, religion, ethnic background, hobbies, and skills. What I've noticed, personally, in the last couple of years in the atheist community, is that we are not immune to these sort of haughty categorizations of who's smart, who's stupid, who's educated, who's uneducated, who's worthy of our respect, who's not worthy of our respect. Like Matt said, I mean, all of that, and beliefs are not people, okay? We're not talking about criticizing beliefs, but it's very easy. This is a natural tendency of our brain to be tribalistic. We're the smart ones, they're the stupid ones, okay? So as someone who watches Matt a lot, I want to say I'm not saying that making fun of ridiculous ideas is not only effective but necessary. We're talking about ideas, okay? Ideas and people are different, but it's hard for our brains to separate them, okay? But I do think as a community of skeptics, we should be reminded that people like me, for example, are not fixed in these states of stupidity, ignorance, or irrational thinking. Some of us can and do and will grow through them given the right combination of interest, experience, and knowledge. There was a recent study done by a political scientist out of Dartmouth College about the best method of correcting false information. He chose that anti-vaccination group, which, man, those people were... Okay. He used 4 different approaches, and none of them were effective. Did anybody read this study? None. Not even. In fact, one method of trying to change their mind with information caused the opposite. They just dug their heels in, and more of them refused to vaccinate. So I really hope to see more studies on exactly focusing on what it is that does change people's minds. Okay. In the meantime, though, people's minds do get changed sometimes. I'm an example of it. Okay. And it's helpful to consider the person you're debating with, that you're arguing with online, or wherever you're disagreeing with that person, that they are not in a fixed state, okay? And I guess I'm here to remind you of anything, it's that it's true. There are people out there that do change their minds. They come along. And if you have that way of thinking about them, I think you might help separate the person from the idea, or the person from the belief. Okay? So the last thing I want to say, really, is that we really do need support as a community. My life just was crazy. I lost friends. My father does not really speak to me. I'm going to be divorced. Whether you grew up in faith or switched sides later in life, being a skeptic, agnostic, freethinker, or atheist puts you on the outside of most groups. And being on the outside and feeling on the outside is not a small matter. I heard this guy on Science Friday. It's an NPR program, and then I got his book, and I read it. And you can too. But he did a little study on, let me just say, they tried to look into the roots of rejection and how it impacts people. And what they found is that the feeling of rejection is no different in your brain than the actual physical harm, like if you broke your arm or something. It registers in the same part of the brain. So they did this study called Cyberball, and you can read about it in the book. I think the researchers named are Eisenberger and Williams. They use a technique involving cyberball. It's an online game where they play a game of catch with 2 players. And eventually the 2 players begin throwing the ball only to each other. So they just exclude the other person. Compared with the volunteers who continue to be included, those who were rejected show increased activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate, I don't know how to say that, anterior insula part of the brain. Two of the regions that show increased activity in response to physical pain. So as far as your brain is concerned, a broken heart is not that different from a broken arm. And I've experienced a lot in the last year, even just telling people I'm an atheist. It's just people automatically don't like you, and it hurts. It's very painful. I don't think we should minimize how much that impacts us as part of the community. Sometime after my deconversion, after many bus rides and YouTube videos, I probably watched Matt Dillon, an Atheist Experience. I mean, I also watched several videos of Richard Carey, other speakers that are here. But the nature of such an overly populated country is that bus rides always involve being like smashed up against six other people. And you know you share entertainment also. Whatever I watched was consumed by like at least 15 other Chinese people. So, and more than your average Chinese person, they were very interested in what I was watching because I was this foreigner. So I'm just saying, Matt, I don't think Richard's here. If you ever go to southern China and people recognize you, you can probably credit me for that. After those videos, somebody did tell me to watch a movie called Higher Ground. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie. It really strikes close to home for me. It's this woman who lost her faith and the steps that she went through, and it's based on a book written by Carolyn Briggs, This Dark World, a memoir of salvation found and lost. So I watched that, and I was like, just crying, because it was just so similar to my own experience in so many ways. And why I'm sharing this with you in the videos, watching the videos too, is I started from China just writing emails to people. So I just looked her up online, and I wrote an email to this woman, Carolyn Briggs. And you know what? She wrote me back. And we became friends. Yeah. And I'm friends with her, and I wrote to some people from a podcast that I liked, and they wrote me back. And and what I'm trying to say to you is, I was in China, I was feeling isolated, but you'd be amazed at how often other people want to reach out and connect too. So, hey, give it a shot. I'm friends with, she's an author, she often writes for the New York Times too. And I've made some amazing friends by just reaching out, and I think it's important that we connect. I don't know where I'd be. I was in such a low place. But I'm telling you, when I got this woman's email, and it was this long, beautiful email about, you're not alone, it's okay, I've been there before, and how much that meant to me in that low place was amazing. So just kind of encouraging you to reach out. There are a few misanthropes out there, but in general, people need and crave connection. I also want to give a shout out to Recovering from Religion. That is a group you're probably familiar with, but they help me a lot. So there's a couple online groups, and somebody set me up with that, and it would just really help me get through the transition process. Though I was only officially employed as a tent maker, missionary twice, for several of the times I was on my own, the missionary mindset pervaded almost every single encounter I had in China. Every Chinese person was a lost soul that needed saving. When I became an atheist, I unconsciously transferred some of that crappy missionary mindset over to the interactions with my religious family and friends. It really took me time and reflection to realize that this approach is unquestionably antithetical to the goals of the larger atheist community. We, as an atheist community, are not missionaries for atheism, okay? That is a terrible mindset, and I'm so glad that I've come through that and I no longer have that attitude. There's really no place for a missionary mindset in the atheist community. The missionary mindset values substitution over transformation in thinking. It aims to affect not how one thinks, but specifically what one thinks. And in the end, what we really want to change is how people think above what people think. If there's any one thing I think we can all agree on, that we want to change how people think, not what people think. I'm not currently in the classroom right now. I am a residential advisor for a company that brings Chinese students to the United States to study in private schools. I am truly honored that I get to continue working with Chinese students in a more constructive capacity than I was doing before. And so it is, in many cases, my aim to demonstrate the true nature of teaching, of education, by modeling this Chinese saying, which goes, 授人以不如 主收之义, which the English equivalent is teach a man to take a fish is not equal to teaching a man how to fish. Okay, so you've seen it. But then I found this one, which I just found more enjoyable. Giving a man a fish and he will eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he will eat for a lifetime. Give a man religion and he will die praying for a fish. So with that I say thank you for your attention.